Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on our Potomac Watch podcast with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel, talking about the Supreme Court decision in Trump v. Anderson that restored him to the ballot in Colorado, and also any other states like Maine or Illinois, which have moved to try to strike him because the decision has implications for those disqualifications as well. Just to elaborate on the point about prosecution, which the liberals seem to want to maintain as an avenue for disqualification under Section 3. What we're talking about here is, let's say that you have a special counsel, Rudy Giuliani, Kim, under President Trump. Not out of the question. And he tried to prosecute a future candidate for federal office. He couldn't do that under this ruling. Congress would have to pass a law disqualifying him. I think that has the virtue of minimizing future partisan mischief. And that's a useful thing.
Well, of course it does. And you know what? Democrats should be very, very happy about that. That's not what they're thinking about at the moment. And I don't think the liberal justices are either, because when they close their eyes, Paul, they see Jack Smith disqualifying Donald Trump. And that's a satisfactory outcome for some Democrats. But I think they should be more worried, as you say, about a future Rudy Giuliani saying, hey, Gavin Newsom cannot run and be on the ballot because I've decided that he somehow is unfit and has engaged in some form of insurrection. And if you say, oh, that's wild, well, a lot of things that have happened in recent years are wild. One thing I just would like to go back to, we're talking a lot about this area of dissension, but I do think it's very important that this was a unanimous opinion. And not only that, but an extremely strong unanimous opinion on the facts that they actually get to. They make a good argument that the entire context of the 14th Amendment argues against giving states a power like this. They go back through history and note Congress's action in this in the past. They also point out, which I think is good, that there is no tradition of states exercising this. And they have a great line saying a lack of precedent is generally a telling indication of a serious constitutional problem with the assertion of power. Meaning the idea that somebody just recently came up with this and that it had never been conceived of in all time before now is quite important. And the completeness of this opinion, I think, is important in sending a message to the states that are engaging in other kinds of lawfare and movement to try to engage in politics. I was happy to see that.
Very good. We should also point out that Jack Smith has not indicted Donald Trump for insurrection. Indicted him for other things, for other specific charges, but insurrection is not one of them, which is, of course, is important and a bearing on this case. All right, let's turn to the pre-Super Tuesday poll, Super Tuesday being the biggest primary day of the calendar. That's this Tuesday. Something like 14 states are going to be voting, and this could be decisive for Donald Trump against Nikki Haley. Certainly is expected to get him close to the number of delegates he would need to have the nomination. He still have a few more contests in March before he hits a majority, I gather. But he's expected to do very well, and for all intents and purposes, this could end the primary campaign, and Nikki Haley will have to make a decision. Nonetheless, what's really interesting is media organizations did some polling in the last week or two, and it shows the Wall Street Journal, the CNN, New York Times poll, CBS, Bloomberg, all show Donald Trump leading Joe Biden in head-to-head races, and even more if there are third or fourth candidates on the ballot. The CNN New York Times survey has Trump winning by 5 points, Wall Street Journal by 2. And Kyle, I don't think that I have seen numbers this bad for an incumbent president seeking re-election. Now, leave out George W. Bush, whose numbers were bad, but he wasn't seeking re-election in 2007 and 8. Since Jimmy Carter, I think these numbers are that bad. And there got to be a lot of tight collars here among Democrats.
For sure. The problem is they just don't know what to do about it because they have a guy at the top of the ticket, Joe Biden, who has wanted to be president ever since he ran back in the 80s. And now he's finally got the job, and he thinks he's doing a good job, and he thinks he's the only one who can save the country again from Donald Trump in the 2024 election. But I think it's becoming hard to evade the truth that the public is worried about the president's age. In particular, in a press conference with the Italian prime minister on Friday, he confused Gaza with Ukraine, said that the U.S. and others would be providing airdrops of additional food and supplies into Ukraine and seek to continue to open up other avenues into Ukraine. And this was not one of those instances where he misspeaks and notices and then backs up and corrects himself. He just blazed right past that. And I think the public sees that kind of thing and thinks even people who are Democrats or who agree with a lot of what President Biden has done, he's 81 now. He's asking to be in office until the end of 2028, 2029 would be the next inauguration. And he would be 86 years old at that point. And I don't know what Democrats need to do to get that through to him, that the voters are seriously concerned about this and it's hurting his poll numbers, but it doesn't seem to have made its way into his head yet.
All right, we're going to take another break. And when we come back, we'll have more on these polling results and what they portend for the presidential contest as it unfolds when we come back. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker. Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast. That is, Play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on our Potomac Watch podcast with Kyle Peterson and Kim Strassel. We're talking about now the spate of polls before Super Tuesday showing that Joe Biden is now trailing Donald Trump in basically every poll, head-to-head competition. And Kim, I know you're an expert at poll reading, and if you look at the internals, as they say, you know, the sort of beyond the top line question of who would you vote for, but you look for the questions that illuminate why people are reaching that conclusion. They're even worse for President Biden. I mean, and I say that because it's not just the age question that Kyle mentions, so that weighs heavily on people's minds, but it's on the economy, it's on foreign policy, it's on immigration. It's hard to find an issue on which the public has a favorable opinion of how Joe Biden has done in office.
Yeah, you know, when I was going through these internals this weekend, Paul, here's the thing that really stuck out at me. People don't really like Donald Trump, okay? If you look at the numbers, it's kind of amazing. So 54% have an unfavorable view of Donald Trump, okay? Asked if he has the personality and temperament to be an effective president, only 41% say Trump does. Asked if Trump has committed serious federal crimes, 53% say yes. And still, they're going to vote for him over Joe Biden because his numbers are even worse. Joe Biden has a 59% unfavorable view. If you ask 74% of Americans say the economy is only fair or poor, 43% of them say that Joe Biden's policies have hurt them personally. 78% think that border is a major problem. And interestingly, despite all the White House's best efforts to suggest that this is Congress's fault, yes, while 81% think Congress shares some blame, 72% think Biden does as well, too. So, I mean, not quite equal, but plenty of blame going toward Biden as well, too. And that's before you look at the numbers that show, I mean, the stunning 73% of people say Biden is too old to be president. And that helps explain these numbers. We're not in a popularity contest here. We're in an unpopularity contest. And right now, Joe Biden is winning that, which means he's not headed for re-election.
Kim, those numbers you were talking about, is that the Wall Street Journal poll?
I'm sorry, this is a New York Times
Siena poll. Okay.
Yeah.
But in the Fox survey, I should mention there was another Fox survey that also, Fox News, Mr. Biden is viewed unfavorably in the polls by 59% of the public, Trump only by 57. So he is viewed more unfavorably than Trump is. And here's another thing, Kyle, that I think is a warning for the president. These 4 years now, nearly 4 years after Donald Trump left the presidency, has a better view of Trump's presidency and what it did for people than they do of Biden's. So they look more fondly at the Trump record than they do Biden's. And obviously proximity to the Biden record is, clear in people's minds. But nonetheless, it suggests that if Biden is going to win and claw back here, he's going to have to tarnish that Trump record.
Yeah, and he may be counting on a couple things. One of them is the idea that President Trump is probably going to be convicted in one of these trials, probably the New York one that is set to start later this month. And you look at the polls of even some of these Republican primaries, you have 10% or more than that even of Republican voters who are voting for President Trump saying that they think a felony conviction would be disqualifying. And maybe those numbers won't hold. Maybe those numbers are people trying to say the right thing that the pollster wants to hear, and they would actually come home and vote for Trump in November. But you got to think that that's probably playing into President Biden's calculation. The second thing is just distance from President Trump. I mean, you watch some of those rallies or you see what he is saying on Truth Social, and it is the kind of thing, I mean, remember all the voters in 2020 who said, I like Trump's policies, I just wish he would stop tweeting. And he is continuing to do that. He's not on Twitter, which is no longer Twitter anymore. It's now X. But there may be some element of thinking that as this gets closer, voters will tune in again to what Trump is saying in all caps on a day-to-day basis and decide they don't want 4 more years of that either. And so there's a lot of uncertainty here. Some of that also is these third-party candidates. A couple polls recently that have Robert F. Kennedy at 13 or 14%. Could have a no labels contender. I think this election is extremely uncertain still.
It is uncertain, no question about that. And a lot can happen, which is what Democratic partisans will say. Polls are a snapshot in time. That much will change. The abortion issue will cut in our favor. The economy will continue to improve, and the public's perception of that improvement will redound to Biden's benefit. And of course, you can always count on Donald Trump to be self-destructive. That's sort of the Democratic argument. The problem with that at this stage is we're a lot closer to the election than you think. This isn't the third year of president. This is the fourth. And we're well into the primaries, Kim. Also, if you're an incumbent, counting on your opponent to implode is not a really good strategy. I mean, if you're ever going to use it, probably Trump has the capacity to implode more than others, not least because of the potential convictions in court. But on the other hand, is there a person in America who doesn't have a conclusion about Donald Trump?
I mean, that's the problem. And the Democratic strategy increasingly seems to be, we'll draw an inside straight, which is really kind of quite the strategy when you think about it. I mean, look, just a couple more things on the polls here. If you go back to that New York Times Siena poll, and I think this kind of touches on this point about, is Donald Trump self-destructive? Maybe. But as you point out, Paul, everyone has now had a lot of experience with these guys. And one of the things that jumped out at me in that poll, 83% of those who voted for Biden last time around say they will vote for him again. 83%. That's not a very inspiring number if you are a Democrat. On the other hand, of those who voted for Trump in 2020, 97% said they're going to vote for him again. And 10% of Joe Biden's supporters now say that they will vote for Donald Trump. That ought to really scare the pants off Democrats. The other thing I would note is that you can talk a lot about bringing home your base and maybe bringing up that enthusiasm on the Democratic side. But the other thing that ought to be worrying Democrats is this spate of swing state polls, which we've had a couple more rounds of just over the past week. One set from Emerson and The Hill, another from Bloomberg and the Morning Consult. Donald Trump is now significantly beating Joe Biden in nearly all those states, including in the Bloomberg ones. He's beating him in 9 in North Carolina, 6 in Georgia, 6 in Pennsylvania, 4 in Wisconsin. And that mirrors the ones before. Those are the states that you have to get if you want to be the president. And I would note that just a couple of months ago, we were getting polls where sometimes Biden was ahead, sometimes Trump was ahead. Maybe they split the states that they were winning. That's not happening anymore. So as you know, we are closer to the election and things are all going the wrong direction for the Democratic candidate.
All right. Still a long way to go, but it does raise the stakes for President Biden for this week's State of the Union address on Thursday evening, which Democrats are suggesting will reframe the presidential race and lay out Biden's themes for the rest of the campaign. So we will see how that goes. Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Kyle. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch, and we'll hope you join us tomorrow.